So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. Welcome to the Scoreboard. I am Jared Kimber. Morning, everyone. England had an early double strike and then India batted for time. It was a baffling early session as it felt like both teams were holding simultaneously. But eventually England chipped through India to get them out for 445, which seemed like a good but maybe not a total that bats England out of the game. It's incredible, actually, how often during baseball that has been the storyline, that teams have got in front of them, but they don't actually end them. And so England then baseballed their way back in completely to this match. Ben Duckett was incredible. He wafted a little bit early on and then just went Duckett. We saw him hit Kuldeep and then Ashwin and finally Jadeja all out of the attack at different times. And just worth remembering also that India batted a little bit slowly because in part they were hoping that the wicket was on its way to deteriorating. If that was the case, we didn't really see the wicket deteriorate all that much. Perhaps just because India couldn't land the ball on a good length. We saw more playing up from the wicket when India were batting and the ball was just plodding on the same length over and over again, occasionally keeping low and the odd one bouncing. England just reverse swept and switch hit and went for them. And so it was actually harder to get that inconsistent bounce that India were looking for. But it is very important to remember, especially looking at many comments online, that India are 238 runs ahead. That is a lot. But as often with baseball, it doesn't feel as much. Anyway, on with the Scoreboard part of the show. If you want to ask a question or talk about anything at all, the best way to do that is to put a comment in, but even better yet is to put in a super chat. And we'll be taking them at the end of the show. But let's start with Ben Duckett in India. So in 2016, Ben Duckett in India was an average of 6, and now he's an average of 66. So that's better. Worth remembering that Ben Duckett was very much sort of thrown in as this spin specialist. I didn't think he was fully developed as a player when they first picked him. I think now he still has weaknesses, but he understands his strengths a lot more, which allows him to sort of hide those weaknesses. He's talked about maturing that we've seen. It's also the thinking, right? Little things like he said before this series that his reverse sweep was as good as his defense. And what he meant by that was not so much that you would still expect to defend more balls off the middle of your bat than you would nail the reverse sweep at the same amount. But in playing that reverse sweep, it actually takes the pressure off him. It makes the bowler think about what they need to do a little bit more. It's hard to cover both boundaries at once. He can now, once you play the reverse sweep, it allows you to dab the ball to point. He played a really good reverse sweep at one point today and then just dropped the ball on the offside afterwards because that field was empty. Little things like that are really, really important. And it's the Indian bowlers struggle with the length when you are playing that. The one thing I find fascinating is I would say that Ben Duckett is the third experiment that England has had with picking really attacking, ultra attacking sort of opening batters. So we saw Ben Duckett, Jason Roy, and Alex Hales. The real difference is baseball, right? Like Ben Duckett is being told, you are picked to do this. You have the freedom to play the way that you do. Even if he had failed, which he hasn't really done too much so far, maybe not as many hundreds as he would like, but he's certainly got England off to a lot of very good starts, which is the other part of it. And he's averaging maybe more than they thought they would get out of an opener. But even if he fails, they're saying, well, look, the guys who were already batting there were failing. What we want you to be able to do is put pressure back on. And that's exactly what he did again today. I thought a little bit loose early on. I think he was just trying to hit the ball in the wrong areas. Instead of trying to slap it to backward point, where I think he's at his absolute best. Looked like he was trying to drive it through mid-off, even straighter at times, extra cover those areas, and was playing and missing. Once he went back to his game, he absolutely exceptional. And it was a fantastic innings. This is now I think the three quickest innings in India, three quickest hundreds in India are all left-handers. I also don't think that's a mistake either, because all the batters, it's Clive Lloyd, who arguably the best touring batter ever, from to Asian conditions. I think he has a ridiculous average and also just a massive amount of runs. Adam Gilchrist, who obviously made that incredible 100 and made a couple of hundreds in India, and then you have Ben Duckett. The other two guys, big. Ben Duckett a little bit shorter, and you could also throw Matt Hayden in there, not quite at the same level of strike rate, but we have seen foreign left-handers do quite well and take the attack back to India, and that's of course in part because they have a lot of bowlers who spin the ball back into left-handers. There are, as we know with Indian cricket in general, they produce a lot more right-hand batters than other countries do, which means that the bowlers who look best in domestic cricket are usually going to be the left-arm spinners spinning it away. Or, at times, I suppose also perhaps faster leg spinners. And if you look at Clive Lloyd played against Prasanna and Chandra, and Gilchrist went up against, is it Rahul Sangvi, I think? Absolutely destroyed him. I think he went it over a runner ball in that innings against Gilchrist, and I didn't even look up how Gilchrist went against him in that one. And and again, we've seen with Duckett today with the ability to go after Jadeja, who was probably the bowler of all the Indian bowlers you thought would be the best at sort of, keeping the score slow. But it's not just Duckett, and I do think it is worth thinking about this a little bit. It's the combination, because I thought Zach Crawley was outstanding. These are all the partnerships of opening batters within India in the last 5 years. So opening partnerships, I should say. So you can see down here that New Zealand, 177 runs out of their opening partnership with an average of 44 and runs per over of 2.3. Australia back here with 169 runs, an average of 21. And England, 298 runs so far, an average of almost 60, and scoring it not far away from a runner ball. And the one thing I thought today was, no matter how England went in this innings, whether the pitch did deteriorate or if Ashwin bowled brilliantly or whatever that may be, the one thing that I thought was really, really, I'll say surprising, but sorry, not the opposite of surprising, really, really obvious, was that England were going to be about 50 for no loss after 10 overs. 50 runs after 10 overs. It might have been for one wicket, or maybe at worst two. But they've just been able to do that you're starting to feel this consistency with the way that they're opening the batting. Absolutely massive. And if you think about English cricket, when they have been successful in India, quite often it is from the opening position. So in 2020-21, they just couldn't get any runs out of their openers. If you look at 2016, 2017, averaging again around 57, 58. 2012, 2013, when obviously they went on to win. A lot of this is Alistair Cook, who's another great player and another left-hander when it comes to making a lot of runs in India as a tourist. And then you've got up here England of this tour so far. And this might regress, of course, there's still a chance that they'll get trapped on some different kinds of wickets, or that, Duckett will miss one early on, and Crawley has been in really good form, but neither of them are the most consistent kinds of scorers generally. This is probably even an outlier for them, although they've shown for a little while that they've been like this. But it's such an advantage for England to have. And now you can. It's funny. I was watching social media and chat, some chat rooms today, and the betting markets. Everyone was spooked by England's start. Like, it's so, and you could see the way India were playing as well. But I want to say it was Bumrah came in at one stage. I don't think it was Siraj, and he just fired one down the leg side. And look, Bumrah is probably more so than someone like Pat Cummins, more likely to occasionally bowl that delivery. But it was notable that it was coming from the pressure of England. But let's just get to the start of the day. It's quite fascinating. In fact, we'll talk about this in a couple of different ways. This is India's tail positions, batting number 8 to number 11, home versus away the last couple of years. You can see the averaging 20, 21 really at home, and struggling when away from home, and that includes Bumrah and Broad. But it does show that the tail, and I thought that if you watch Siraj and Bumrah bat today, which is one reason I actually thought that England might get off to it, get a few runs on the way back, just because that pitch did flatten out a little bit. But it's worth just saying how, Siraj and Bumrah have improved a lot as batters as well. And certainly at home, I think they have very good techniques. I was really impressed by the way Bumrah went about his innings. If it was over pitched or wide, he was like, I will attack width or I will attack length. And if it was a good ball, he just defended. That's kind of the way you want your tail-enders to attack, right? This is all tail positions, 8 to 10 at home in the last 5 years. And you can see outside of New Zealand, which has, the greatest number 11 of all time, probably, would you get a bit of Kyle Jamieson in that batting order as well? Probably around number 8. Maybe some Mitch Santner at times as well, and Tim Southey. So it's good company for India to be in and for their tail to be in. Dhruv Jurel, my notes on him so far are just tidiness with the bat and the ball. I think he was about 3 or 4 balls in, and I was like, he completely lines up the way you want a test player to line up. There's not a lot of moving parts. Bat path comes correctly. There might be minor technical things that eventually bowlers can get on top of, but there isn't an obvious flaw that, after 5 or 10 tests, people are going to start to attack. He's probably a little bit unlucky to be caught. Brilliant catch, again, by Ben Foakes, but he got a lot of edge on that ball. Much more likely to be caught at slip from that edge than you are to get caught behind. But I thought it was an excellent effort from Ben Foakes again. But I like the way he lined up. I like also when Bumrah came in and Bumrah looked okay for a couple of balls, he didn't instantly start swinging and he batted quite smart. Again, lots of things to like about the way he went about it. And with his wicket keeping, he moves quite well. His footwork looks okay. Neat is the word I would go for at the moment. And, if you're a wicketkeeper, especially someone like him who hasn't kept a lot, neat's a good one. You want to be neat. And Ashwin, who I thought this morning coming in that Ashwin and Jadeja batting together was kind of going to be England's worst nightmare just because of their ability to soak up good balls. Those soft hands that they play with, their ability to smother the spin, to not score quickly, but to take a lot of time out of the game, which was clearly India's plan. We'll talk about that in a moment. And again, we've seen Ashwin play that kind of innings. Instead of getting Jadeja as his partner, he got Jurel. So it still worked for India in the plan that they were going for. Although, certainly from everything we have seen, you could make the case that he went a little bit slower than what... certainly... They didn't put a lot of pressure back on England. And I think that's... We'll get to it in a moment. I won't go ahead too far. Jasprit Bumrah's highest test scores. Good to see that he finally made some runs outside of England, where he, up until this point, has been a near specialist batter. And his test batting average in England is hilarious, averaging 11, where he averages 4 in the rest of the world. I like that. But I did like the way he went about his batting today. All right, and so I want to talk about this interesting first session. This is the runs by session. So you can see 19% of the day's runs were scored, and remember, only India batted in this session. 27% of the runs were scored in the second session. This included 5 penalty runs and also 1. So England was 6 runs without having faced a legal ball, because I think it was a no ball first ball of their innings. And you can see, obviously, England went about this very, very differently, especially after the break. But this first session, I found this fascinating because essentially the two teams were playing in a way where they were both happy with the way the game was going. It got away from England because it went into that second session. That bit England won't be happy with. But I was watching England thinking they're not that disappointed here. They got the Jadeja wicket early, so they then weren't suddenly worried about Jadeja making a double hundred and really causing them some issues. They were sitting back a little bit and waiting for the Indians to eventually go out, with a surface that was giving them a little bit of assistance at that time. Whereas India were batting not just for runs, but for time, because India could see that the odd ball was misbehaving, and they were thinking, if we can take 2, 3, maybe even 4 more hours out of this, it will be as important as actually, making extra runs. At the moment, this looks like India maybe have got this wrong, just because England have scored so quickly so quickly and so effortlessly. But remember, to go back to my intro, England are still 238 runs behind. So we don't know if India did the right thing or not. But for me, I like the thought process with India of just trying to go as long as possible and draw the game out, because it does feel like an older wicket. I said that about 5 overs in on day one. It looks like one of those older wickets in India where time is more important than runs. But they're not playing a team like that anymore, right? Even Australia in the late 90s, early 2000s didn't score at the rate that England do. They don't change the game at that point. And so what was it? When England got to 120 or 130 really, really quickly, they'd already put pressure back on India, despite the fact that India still had, well over, 300 run lead at that point. And so I'm not saying that India made a mistake, because they might still win this test match very, very easily. And I'm not saying that England shouldn't have pushed harder, because eventually India scored a little bit more. But it was interesting watching two teams kind of be happy with their situation and play off each other in that way. I thought it was just a remarkably weird little session of cricket. This is something else. England are batting really, really well today, but it's something that I've been wanting to look up for a while. Myself and John Norman on TalkSport talk a lot about the fact that for all of England's success under Bazball, it's been weirdly with the bat in the second innings and not the first innings. So in the first innings, they are averaging 36.02 runs per wicket, which is a healthy, you can see they're about 4 runs over per wicket everyone else. You would certainly take that. But most teams average more in the first innings and then way less in the second innings, whereas England actually average more in the second innings. And I think some of this, of course, is that copying that one-day method and really enjoying batting in that second innings when they know exactly what they have to do. They understand the situation a lot more, and I think that works for the style of cricket that they are currently going for. But even within that, I find it remarkable that any team can do better in the second innings than the first innings. But there are other parts to this, and it came out again today, which is another reason I want to mention it, is because England score so quickly, they don't bat their second innings as much on the 5th day, right? It's really more a 4th day thing. So the pitches haven't deteriorated as much. So they are actually taking out, in some cases, that, the wicket falling apart at the end. In England, wickets don't tend to fall apart all that much as well. But, they have played in Pakistan and they have played in New Zealand. And now they're playing in India. A little bit different in those situations, in each one. We've seen some wickets in Pakistan that, some of the wickets that they played test matches on there are going to be great for the rest of time. They will never deteriorate. They're probably still playing on them in some cases. But I did find this a very, very fascinating pattern altogether when you have a look at it. And then finally, I thought I would just talk about the run-outs. So Ravi Jadeja yesterday involved in another run-out. Was it 3 run-outs in this series so far? And so I said yesterday that I needed to do more research. I've been talking to Gary about Gary Morgan about this to try and work out exactly how much Jadeja's runouts are an issue or not an issue, or how it's working. And sorry, all my lights seem to have gone out. So I wanted to look at the whole situation. This isn't enough research yet, because I need to do a lot more. But on the face of it, I found some interesting things. These are from Gary Morgan. Sorry, I should have written up here. This is runs per run out. It isn't runs per run out, which is how I would like to do this. But to start with, we just did runs per run out. So Jadeja roughly has a run out in Test cricket every 666 runs. This is the rest of Test cricket. This doesn't mean that Jadeja's the absolute worst runner in Test cricket or anything else. I would have, I'd have to have a look. I know Ponting is someone that from memory, was involved in a lot of runouts in Test cricket. There might be other players who didn't play as many Test matches who are involved with more runouts. I'm not 100% on these numbers yet. And the reason I'm not 100% on these numbers yet is because essentially this number is a slight approximation, because I know how many runs he's made. And so we know roughly how many he's made in partnerships. But I didn't have this number exactly. But I just wanted to put it up so we had something to work from here. And this number I'm pretty sure is correct, but it's suspiciously almost double this one. And so I'm just hoping that this is counting out runouts from batters at the striker's end and the non-striker's end. But I believe it is. Okay. But then I looked up a couple of other things here. When fielding, Jadeja's been involved in 8 test runouts, of which I have in my database. The fielder isn't always mentioned, and so sometimes, these are missed a little bit more and everything else. But I think this is roughly correct. And when batting, he's been involved in 9. So he's only a net run out down. I'm just putting that together because I thought it was a fascinating one. I'm not sure how much any of this says. I think we might have to do a proper video on this and try and work it out deeply. But this is the last one. Again, I'm not 100% sure in any of these numbers, just because run-out numbers are not kept as accurately as other stats are. But from what I can tell, Jadeja, of those 9 run-outs he's been involved in when batting in Test cricket, has been out once, and all other batters have been out the 8 times. It would suggest, based on this, that he's almost net neutral when it comes to Test run-outs because he's getting so many in the field. But it would also suggest, based on, certainly on this, if these metrics are correct, and also on this, that he's involved in more run-outs than most players, and that those run-outs are almost exclusively the person at the other end. Someone asked a question the other day about whether fast runners run batters out at the other end. I think it's usually how fast you run, and if you can make it. Obviously, for the player at the other end, you're making an assumption, right? And it's harder for you to work that out. And so there is an element of always of those things happening. Not conclusive, probably something I'll have to look at more. But it's something I've always really wanted to have a look at. So I will try and go through the database as much as I can to see how far we can have a look at it. But for those who wanted to ask, as it currently stands, I would say that Jadeja is a bit of an issue when he's running between wickets. This is not as uncommon as you would think because, as I said, I think Ponting, who is another player who was deadly with his running between wickets, generally, and I remember looking up David Warner in T20 cricket. David Warner had a record of run-outs in T20 cricket. It was almost double that of other openers. And the reason being is that is part of Jadeja's skill and Warner's skill and Ponting's skill is pushing as hard as possible. So there is an element of that. Having said that, you would probably prefer it not to be him that's not out and everyone else who's out more. I mean, and the only caveat I'm going to put on this, and we'd need to go through almost every test run out that Jadeja is involved in, we have to have a look at who the player is at the other end. Because Jadeja generally has batted 6, 7, 8, maybe a little bit of 9 when he started his career. If you bat with the tail more, you are more likely to be in a situation where there's more run-outs. And also, it's more likely that they will be run out than the player who actually understands how to run between the wickets. If you think tail-enders are bad at batting, you should see them run between wickets. Anyway, there we go. Remember, that is the end of the scoreboard part of the show, but not the end of the show. We're going to stick around. If you have a super chat or any chats or any questions you want to put them in. We'll have a quick break and I'll go through everything else that is... I'll go through all the comments, that are already here. I'm Jared Kimber, and let's have a break, and we'll come back in a moment and talk more with your questions. This is just one of our YouTube channels. We also have another one that covers the greatest stories in our sport called Good Areas. Why do India keep losing World Cups? How did Stuart Broad become a meme king? And the long sordid history of South Africa chasing. Head over to Good Areas a couple of times a week for the best stories in cricket. A few years ago, I had a panic attack after ESPN Cricinfo made me their global writer. I'd earned that position, but I also felt like a fraud at the time because I didn't really understand how I wrote. I understand that there was a process and gears and different styles and things, but how it all came together felt a little bit random. And so I began to panic like a golfer with a natural swing, worried one day I'd just end up with the yips. And would my career be over? So I took my writing apart piece by piece until I understood it. And then I figured out I could teach others all the mistakes I had learned. So I started an online course where I tried to make it as cheap as possible so people like me would be able to afford it. It's called Fans with Laptops, and heaps of people from around the world have used it so far, from first-time writers all the way through to professionals trying to improve. I started with a simple plan to make each writer the best they could be, and from the feedback I've received over the years, it seems like the course does that. But after COVID, my career changed. I came to YouTube, started podcasts, wrote emails, and formed a new career on my own going forward. So I now had something else to offer, the multimedia side of things, social media and everything else. Not to mention that I was building everything up as an independent. And so I added all of that to my course. So if you have ever wanted to work in sports as a writer or podcaster or making videos or anything else, Fans with Laptops is the place to start. If you think you qualify as a fan and you have a laptop and you want to work in sport, click on the link. All right, thanks to everyone. Scoreboard, Jared Kimber, all those things. We got a couple of super chats, but a few more chats as well. If you want to ask a question, put it in the comments. If you definitely want it answered, put it in as a super chat. Ayush said, McCullum was asked how England would play Boomerang, and he said, they're all better than I was, they'll figure it out. Shukri Conrad said, these players are further from Test cricket than they think. Contrast. Yes, because one is 11 players who have won Test series around the world, and you got one of the world's best all-rounders. You've got one of the world's best batters, one of the world's best seam bowlers, experienced players who've won World Cups and all sorts of things. And the other one, you have at best a fifth 11 from South Africa. That's the contrast. McCullum would coach those players differently than Shukri Conrad would, but Shukri Conrad, what he might be saying to the players also is, you've got a bit of a taste of it, and now you understand, but there's a lot to do before you're going to be at this level. He might be challenging them, right? There's different ways of coaching. I don't think everyone just has to be McCullum. I think there are, even McCullum would say there are many methods. I'm not saying that Shukri Conrad has done well, but in some ways, that's kind of how it all works. Rahul says, Duckett and Crawley have handled Bumrah better than the other English batters. Is this due to their lack of trigger movement, or is it just down to Bumrah being less effective with a new ball? I think it is. Bumrah being less effective with a new ball. I think it is the fact that it's easier to hit him for boundaries at that point. Very hard to hit him for boundaries in Indian conditions as that ball gets older. And I had a third one. Oh, the third one is, and Gareth Batty was talking about this with us on TalkSport today, about part of the success of Duckett Crawley is that you've got a massively tall right-hander and a massively short, can you be massively short? An incredibly short left-hander. And it's the juxtaposition which actually causes some issues. And, if you go back, I always thought that Langer and Hayden worked quite well as together for a similar thing, even though that they were both left-handers. But again, it wasn't an easy pairing to bowl to. And left hand, right hand can be an issue. People don't talk about lengths. It's exactly the same, right? The length that you bowl to Crawley and the length that you bowl to Duckett are wildly different. In fact, Crawley, you're probably looking at length ball, maybe just a little bit shorter than that. At and around outside off stump. He's probably your normal delivery to him. Ben Duckett, you're looking at back of a length outside off stump, or really attacking the stump, the sort of the top of off stump. It's just a different game, and I think that also plays a part. Not that Bumrah can't work it out, but it just works quite well. But the hard ball is a part of it. I think there's another question about that we might get to in a bit. Sriram says, why is Rohit hesitant to open the bowling with Ashwin at one end? I can understand giving the new ball to seamers to get the ball to swing, but their openers always score minimum 50 runs. I mean, not always, but certainly it does feel that way a bit at the moment. I think if England need to bat a second innings, which I'm assuming they will, we will see a spinner open in the second innings. There was certainly some help for the seamers at times. They've got Siraj in the side. I'm not massively against it, bowling with two seamers. I'm trying to think, based on what I saw, because England's second new ball, they went with Root. And we kind of question why they didn't go with Wood. So yeah, I get your question. I don't think it's wrong, because I've been thinking a similar thing a little bit as well. But at the same time, uh, you have two strike bowlers who can probably take wickets in bunches. It's worth probably giving them the ball. But I would probably just make the decisions a little bit earlier at times. I don't know if that was as much of an issue today, just thinking about it, because my memory was that if you take away the the 5 penalty runs and the 1 no ball, England didn't get off to as much of a fly. It was really after that break, and I thought that was more Kuldeep that they were attacking. So you can make an argument that Kuldeep should have, that Ashwin should have been bowling ahead of Kuldeep. But I also think that they believe that. Yeah, actually, I'm trying to work through the maths on it. I don't think it was as much of an issue today, because I do think from memory that a lot of those runs actually went through Kuldeep rather than anyone else, and that they didn't start as quickly. Having said that, Duckett was still off to a bit of a flyer. But how many times did he play and miss Siraj? Like, he could have nicked off to Siraj over and over again early on. And with Bumrah, are you not going to give the new ball to Bumrah? I mean, I'm not against it, but it's a weirder conversation. Rupesh says, I think Ashman will get 600 before retirement. Do you know what? If you'd asked me that before this series, Rupesh, I would have said yes. It would go on for ages. Just times in this series, he hasn't looked 100%. And I don't want to say that's age. It could just be a bad series. The ball might not be coming out. It's the way England are playing him. It could be all of these things. I'll go back to what he said before the series. He said when England come at him, he would work out a plan of how to attack them. I hope he was foxing and because why have one of the greatest brains in cricket and wait for that? Why not come up with plans, D, E, F, and G, then knowing that Ashwin has so much more in his bag, and then he can just go with them and just go, okay, well, I tried this and they did this, and I tried this and they went this. Why don't I try one of those other, ideas that I had? But he doesn't look as good this series, let's be honest, at the moment. And you have to give credit to the way that England's batted. We've also seen different kinds of wickets, but I've seen him on these kinds of wickets look sensational before. He could still take. There's still 18 wickets to be fallen, so he could still take 16 of the wickets, potential England wickets from here on in, and absolutely, cruise to victory for India from there. But I still think he has it within him to take 600 wickets. At that point, it really is about how much the player wants to keep putting his body through it. Right? It's a tough regime. How long does he want to play cricket for? He's got, of all the players, he's the player with like a guaranteed media career, like with what he does with his YouTube page. I've talked to his management before about what could be done with him in his own media space. There's also certainly he's going to be in demand around the world. He could create a media like a sports media empire based around his own personality. A different version of Pat McAfee, or maybe more similar to, JJ Redick, the sorts of American people that we're seeing coming through. I think he is like a combination of JJ Redick and Draymond Green, and yet his own complete personality, right, within that. It's fascinating to me what he could do next. But, don't give it up unless you want to, right? Unless your body says you have to, or whether you're tired from it or anything else. But there's nothing that should be able to stop him from getting 600 wickets, because he's that level of bowler. And even if he reduces his reduces his skill from S tier level to, B level, he's still going to be a very good bowler in Indian conditions. He's got that little bit of batting as well, helps with tactical stuff. Rupesh says, when will we get the Ashwin video on the other channel? Well, thank you for paying for this message, because let's just see. It's not up yet. It'll be up very soon. It's finished. I think Cheyenne's probably just putting the final touches on it, and Shubu and Muku are just probably playing around with it. But yeah, it's pretty much finished. And, it was only stumps an hour ago, but we'd finished it days ago. We finished it for the last test, but we're probably just updating. I'm not involved with it because I'm on air with you guys, but I would assume we're just updating the stats at the moment. Harsh says, given how unpredictable the series has been, I feel tomorrow's day will be a balanced contest rather than one side dominating. Yeah, I think this is one thing I found interesting. So on day one of this test, when the toss came in, England went out to 6-1. And I was like, how could you be confident? And this is on the Betfair exchanges. This is where the smart money comes in. And I was thinking, how can anyone be confident enough in India, even knowing what we know about Indian conditions and batting first and everything else, that this is going to be like India are so ahead of this game already. They got out to, I want to say 8 or 9-1 at times when India was batting towards probably, I would have said it was when Ashwin and Jarrell were batting together. And again, I was thinking to myself, they're not batting England out of this game. England is still within a chance of getting this game. If they were over 500 or over 470 with that partnership, that's a very different situation. And if you look at it, that's what we've seen in this. Look at day one. England get on top early on. India pull themselves all the way back, and then England get the short ball wicket and then the run out to give themselves a chance, right? India lose 2 quick wickets today. They then string out their innings as long as physically possible, but don't score that many runs. But get themselves certainly back on top in the game, clearly on top, I should say, in the game. And then you see the England innings come out, and suddenly everyone's like, oh no, England's really good. And then I don't think the odds were ever even on a win, but England came way into about 3-1 at one stage. It just tells you, and you look at this series all the way through, Hyderabad and Vizag, all the way through. You have a look. We've seen similar patterns. Part of it is just, I think, the way England play. We'll save the third innings pickle until India have to bat in the third innings. But remember to ask me that question if I don't put a video up about it. I don't put it on the scoreboard, I should say. But, England just managed to keep themselves in games, keep it interesting. And India have been the better team, I would say, through all 3 test matches in total, like by a significant distance. But it's so rare for them to ever be in a situation when they look like they're shutting England out. And it was funny, actually. I was talking to some people involved with the England team, and they were saying that they didn't think England was that confident coming in, There was a lot of hype being talked about, a lot of positivity, I should say, from the guys at the top, McCullum and Stokes. But I think there were some England players going, yeah, but we're still going to India, and it's Ashwin, and it's Jadeja, and it's Akshar Patel, and, the wickets are going to rag, and we don't even know how this thing that we're doing is going to work over there and everything else. It's not how England feel now, right? Like, England now go, okay, we won the first test. We gave ourselves a chance of stealing the second test. And they will feel even 238 runs behind. Even if they end up 100 runs behind, I still think they'll feel really confident. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting about the way that they play, is the other team has to shut them out. And we just don't see it enough, right? So many times in baseball, I would say, for all the spectacular stuff of England, I've been looking at the opposition just going, this is your chance to just make a few extra 100 runs and just end the game. So Lord's Test, which Australia won, of course. But Lord's Test, I remember just thinking, Australia should have just shut that game down. They were so far ahead of that game, and they didn't. They allowed England a chance, and it keeps happening again and again. And even if England finish 100 runs behind here, I still think they're within touching distance of the game. And that isn't how we've generally seen Test cricket. But part of it is because of the way that England are so much better in the second innings than they are in the first innings when it comes to batting. And the other one is that they're just thinking about these things very differently to how teams would generally think about them. Ayush says, how much of England's opening is down to the new ball being the best time of batting in Asia? Yeah, I think I might have talked about this. If you go back to the video about why I said baseball might work in England, Ayush, before the series, this is one thing I mentioned right then. That's the time to hit a hard ball, right? After then, you can score big. But, and there are certain pitches that keep their pace and, certain pitches that skid on a little bit more in India and everything else, or in India and Sri Lanka and UAE. Sometimes you do get those sorts of wickets. But generally, what happens is the ball just gets a little bit softer. Sometimes it's harder to get the batters out, but it's also harder to score runs. So I think England were very conscious of this. I don't know how much they've changed their batting. I think they've gone after the quick bowlers early on a little bit more than they normally would have. Maybe more than they would have in England. unless the quick bowlers bowl poorly, and sometimes they go after you a little bit, then you start to bowl poorly, and so they cash in. But I'm saying, as far as putting pressure on even good balls, I feel like they've certainly done that. Whereas, and then pulled themselves back a little bit against the spin. But you're not wrong. It's for me, it is a part of just playing in Asia, but also it matches what they do. And we talk a lot about basketball, but just focus on. Sometimes it is doing what your strengths are. And in this case, that is a definite strength of English cricket. And it just happens to match with the fact that it's the right thing to do in these conditions as well. Rahul says, why did no one bat like England under Bazball on flat tracks in the early 2000s? Because one-day cricket and T20 cricket were not developed enough. Go back to the early 2000s, and I think you'll find between overs 10 and 40 in ODI cricket that the average runs per over probably around 4.1 would be my guess. All right. Now you're looking at 5, 5.5, 6 for some of these teams. Right? England score pretty much at a run a ball between overs 10 and 40 in ODI cricket. Did beforehand. Sorry, let me get my lights back on. Certainly did before everything went a bit pear-shaped for them in ODI cricket. The skills had to catch up. It isn't just a case of attacking more. If you look at what England are doing, it isn't slogging. It isn't intent-filled batting. It is putting pressure on the bowlers so they can't bowl their best ball. It is expanding the field so it's very easy to rotate the strike. It is taking down matchups that are in your favor. A lot of those things weren't really part of it. If you think about early 2000s ODI cricket, Manny Cohen from the old Test match sofa used to call them the agreed upon singles, right? The middle overs of an ODI, you've got the fielder out at deep cover, and half the batters in the world will just try and hit it straight to him and take a single. That wasn't always the case, but if you look at the run rates around the world, it was a fairly agreed upon period of play of, you're going to score about 120, 130 runs, and we're going to take 2 or 3 wickets. Right? And then it's about what you do in the power play and then how ballistic you go at the death. That's how it was played. That's not how one-day cricket is played anymore. It's why, even in that last World Cup, Australia had to completely change the way they were thinking about bowling in those middle overs because they were still trying to constrict, whereas all the other teams had worked out that you needed to take wickets. And by the end of that World Cup, Australia had nailed, that way of thinking. And it's not about bowling Yorkers and bowling peach balls and that spin sideways. If you look at England, it's about spinners who turn the ball both ways. It's about fast bowlers who are willing to go for runs, but in a way that is dangerous for the batter. So Liam Plunkett bowling, short and back of the length. It's coming up with interesting field settings like what Pat Cummins did. It's making batters hit shots that they are uncomfortable with in order for them to get their boundaries, or to take extra risks that they may not want to do in order to get those boundaries. That is the way that you bowl. And if you look at England's Bazball bowling, they're still doing that, but in test matches. And then with batting, as I said, it is about Stokes, Morgan, Root, those 3 guys of just being able to rotate the strike close to a runnable as possible with as few risks as possible. That is what Bazball batting is about. That did not exist in the early 2000s. Abhijit says, Steve Waugh has been involved in the most runouts. Does he? I thought it was Ponting. It might be all international cricket, or it might be ODI cricket I'm thinking of for Ponting. I saw his name a lot in the list that I was looking at for Jadeja as well. How do you remember him as a runner between wickets? Very similar to Jadeja and Warner, those sorts of guys, in that I've talked about it. There are 2 kinds of very, very aggressive runners between wickets. There are the kinds who are just trying to maximize their runs by any means necessary. So you would certainly put Ponting in that. You would certainly put Virat Kohli in that. I'm trying to think of some others. But those kinds of runners between wickets, where for them it's just like every single run that is out here, I'm going to be as fit as possible, run as hard as possible, and take every run. Then you have that sort of Steve Waugh, maybe Jonty Rhodes, David Warner, Ravi Jadeja thing, where they actually weaponize the running between wickets as almost another extra bow of attacking cricket. So they are probably taking slightly even higher risks, but they are doing it in order to manipulate the field. So Steve Waugh was excellent at being able to defend the ball roughly in the spot where he thought there was 3/4 of a chance of a run that he could put pressure on the opposition. So if you go back and you have a look, he was very good at defending between cover and backward point, and then between kind of mid-wicket through to maybe just behind square on the leg side. And he would rotate his hands to defend where the gap was. And a lot of these runs were stolen. You have a look at Steve Waugh, the amount of times he would be diving and getting up and dusting himself off. But he was manipulating the field to put extra pressure back on the bowler. You can't bowl that line anymore. And he was doing it with defensive shots. So you do see there's certainly a pattern within those sorts of players. It's worth remembering that there's a reason why Australians are more into running between wicket than anyone else in the world. It's because the grounds are bigger. And so in most places in the world, if you beat the outfield, you're a fair chance of getting a boundary. And the MCG, if you beat the outfield, you're a fair chance of getting a 3. Right? So running between the wicket is more important in Australia. The other thing is that it's hugely drilled into you as a young Australian cricketer that the best place to bat is at the other end. That's all you are told, right? The best place to bat is at the other end, and constantly to rotate strike. And if you go through the history of cricket, Australia really pioneered, stealing singles and looking for runs in Test match cricket. That's why Bill Brown and Vinu Mankad met, because Vinu Mankad was trying to rotate the strike and kept leaving the crease early. And if you go to one-day cricket, that 1987 World Cup, they tried to get as fit as they could and be as aggressive with running between wickets as they could. And that's really what set the scene for running between wickets in limited overs cricket. Let us take a break. If you've got any more questions, please put them through. If it's got a super chat, I will definitely get to them. But I've got a little bit longer. So let's play another ad, and then we'll come back after the ad, and I'll answer more questions here on the scoreboard. NordVPN know nothing about knuckleballs, but they can help you with online safety. If you need a VPN, use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount and 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is risk-free. The link is in the show notes. So stop thinking about knuckleballs for 2 minutes and go to nordvpn.com/Kimber and get your deal.
Support us on Patreon. Join for exclusive perks like AMAs, live calls with me, and a vibrant Discord community. Enjoy ad-free content, early podcast episodes, and access to my emailer, plus behind-the-scenes stuff. We've built our channel on Patreon support, so a huge thanks to everyone who has helped. In cricket, I don't believe in momentum, but when it comes to my social media videos, I like Memento. Its AI listens to me so that I don't have to, and then it can chuck in GIFs and subtitles and make it all fit all the different kinds of social media sizes. Memento does it all. It slices, it dices, and it resizes all of your hottest takes, your coldest facts, and your weirdest vibes. Grab it today and make your content start smashing the ball all around social media.
All right, welcome back. All right, where are we? Sorry, I just lost one. I've taken all the normal chats from the room, but keep putting your comments in, and thank you very much for supporting us. But if you're desperate for a question to be answered, super chat from here on in is the best way to go. Ashish says, hey Jared, it's been around 20 months of baseball, and I've loved every bit of it, irrespective of the result. I've been covering Test cricket since 2008 professionally. 2007 with my blog. And 2007 to 2015 was a bit of a slog. There were some great moments, don't get me wrong, and I covered some great Test matches, and the Mitchell Johnson and the couple of incredible Test matches, 3 incredible finishes at Headingley alone, right? So I've covered some great cricket, but there were lots of times when it was a slog. 2017 to 2022 was great because wickets fell, and who cares about batters? But this is remarkable, and I cover the history of cricket. If you read my book on the history of Test matches, you'll see that England really isn't relevant after World War II all that much. They have a good period where they play some good cricket. They have the cutter bowlers of the 1950s. Bob Appleyard is a fascinating cricketer, but after that, almost all the other teams have a moment or a reason to talk about them, and that doesn't really happen with English cricket outside of how bad they were in the 80s into the 90s. They were brilliant around 10, 11, 9, 10, 11, 12, that period. But it was as good as they were. It was interesting in an intellectual point of view, but maybe not as interesting to watch. And it sort of was over almost as quickly as it started. This is fascinating. And it's fascinating whether it works, whether it doesn't work. It's fascinating to see what impact it will have on teams like Pakistan and Zimbabwe, who are already looking to see in women's cricket, how they're looking at it, right? Like, it's working right across the board. It's changing what we think about with cricket. So I've been talking about this a little bit on the radio, but some of my most fascinating things about it is the amount of bounces we had in that Lord's Test, right? Of literally, that's almost algorithmic at that point, where both teams, the analyst looks at it and goes, the best ball to bowl on this pitch is the bouncer. Let's just keep bowling the bouncer. That is a birth of almost a completely different kind of cricket match. It's incredible. Then you've got, in that same series, they started with the straight hit fielder. Now, we've had straight hit fielders before. Cameron White against Lasith Malinga, Kyron Pollard's had them occasionally. But they used one for Usman Khawaja because every time Usman Khawaja came down the wicket, he would hit almost dead straight. And then afterwards, England went, why are we putting out a fielder at long off and at long on? Let's keep one up and have the fielder straight so that they can kind of cover both boundaries and the batter will have to swing across the line. From the moment I saw them do it for Usman Khawaja, and the minute I saw them do it for another batter, I was like, I cannot believe it's taken cricket this long to work out something as simple as that. And the other one that has always bothered me, I should say that one I never thought of myself, which really annoys me. The one that I've always wondered about, especially since I got into analytics, was why do people just automatically put a fielder out for the sweep when the vast majority of batters don't sweep or aren't comfortable with sweep or don't play it particularly well, right? It's never made any sense to me. And so England, so many times, have kept the player up and just said, sweep. And I think it was the Ireland Test match was the first time I saw that. We're talking about really nerdish points right now, right? Forgetting the innings against Pakistan and, some of the tight matches and the way they bring themselves back into games and everything else. There's just so many facets to it that I find fascinating. I don't know if another team will come in and do it better than them. I don't know if it's sustainable long term. I don't know if there's a certain point England should actually pair it back in and try something different. But there are parts of it that I think make sense and have already changed the game. And I think that is absolutely incredible. Ayush says, India didn't find reverse the way England did. How much of it is due to the opener smashing the leather? Thought they reversed the ball as much as England did. Bumrah got a little bit of reverse. There was a couple of bigger reversing swings from Siraj. Remember, they haven't been bowling as long. So I thought the first time England got reverse, it just nipped them around a little bit. It was maybe one of the later periods that they got it around. So, it could be that England have damaged the ball, but I wouldn't have thought that was the case. Osh says, Duckett played a remarkable low backlift bunt down the ground to a low full toss from Bumrah. It seems to me like a great method to set up for his Yorker in Test cricket. Yeah, but you can't set up for his Yorker really, because if you set up for his Yorker, you're in trouble from the bouncer, right? Like the Yorker's going to come, and so the one thing I would say about Bumrah is there's very little things that I think anyone could help him with because he's so natural at picking things up. But I would love for him to bowl fewer Yorkers when he's bowling with reverse and actually bowl more at the knee pad. And the reason is that generally, if you bowling more Yorkers, as good as his Yorker is, you're actually giving the opposition a chance to realize what you're doing. Whereas knee pad bowling, there's not as much they can do when it's reversing. Your foot's a little bit more planted. I wouldn't want him ever to stop bowling his Yorker because I like... maybe once every 3 overs when it's reversing, I think it's always worth a shot. But I actually think that sometimes he bowls a little bit too full when he's reversing the ball, which I think, as I said, the best way of reversing it is probably shin to knee high a little bit more. But yeah, if you know he's going to bowl it and you can do that sort of low back left bunt, that's a perfect way of doing it. The minute you're playing an aggressive shot, you're hoping that the ball isn't off a Yorker length delivery or attempted Yorker. You're hoping that you're not actually going to get Yorked though, right? So having a low back lift doesn't matter if the ball still sneaks beneath your bat. And that's the problem with Yorkers, and that's why they are so effective when you get them right. Abhinav says, Crawley and Duckett have obvious technical flaws in their games, and their stats show them. But what has been the change in their game under Stokes that they now seem to be doing good and scoring runs? A lot of it is that they've been told that failure. I think if you have an issue in your game and you know that if you're going to average 28 or 29 and be dropped, you start to be defined by the issue that you have, and you get into a negative loop. And it's one of the reasons why I talk about this all the time. The way we drop players in Test cricket is silly. If you think that is the best option, and he's played a couple of Test matches that haven't worked, then rotate him out to the side and try someone else in that position briefly, and then tell him that he's going to come back. And maybe the conditions didn't suit him, or the bowlers have worked him out, or whatever that be. Whereas in Test cricket, there's too much of just dropping people, and based on 3 or 4 tests, or even sometimes 1 or 2 tests, and then we don't see them again for 2 years. That tells me you don't know what you're doing as a selector, and you shouldn't be in that job. If you haven't worked out who the best players are, so this new method of England sort of just saying to the players, we know you're not very good, but we're not going to replace you, I think helps with that. Ben Duckett wouldn't have been backed to come in and not leave the ball with any other leadership group, almost in world cricket, right? Even in Australia, I think they would have been like, you're going to have to leave some, mate. So every time he would have hung the butt out to dry, he would have been in trouble beforehand. Whereas now he's not doing that, which means he's scoring quite quicker. If you bowl back of the length to Ben Duckett now in world cricket, you know that you might get him to edge into the cordon. But you also know that you're going to go for some runs, and that he will manipulate the field a little bit, and you'll have to make a decision whether you want to give him a single or let him slash a few fours against you. Whereas I think before, he probably would have been, if he wouldn't have come back into this period of cricket, he just would have been leaving more balls. And so he wouldn't have put that same pressure back on you, but he still would have necked off a lot of balls to that region. So now he's taking that weakness and he's making it uncomfortable for the bowler to bowl there. And it's I think with Zach Crawley, if I'm being honest, he has slightly negated some of his weakness when it comes to that around the off stump, that sort of driving on the up with an angled bat. That should that should work better, especially against pace bowlers in Asia. I still think that he's going to struggle against spinners outside of in Asian conditions. I'm not sure I've seen anything from Crawley that has suggested to me that that's not the case on this tour. But again, if you're scoring really, really quickly for 10 or 12 overs, you're getting yourself to a position where you're regularly getting starts of 30 to 40 runs. You're putting pressure back on the opposition. They now need to make decisions. And those decisions might be to go away from the places that they want to bowl because you're scoring off them. And I think that's a really important part of all this. Zen says, speaking of players creating media, Ben Foster started his football player YouTube channel. This led to him being signed by Wrexham. So at what point do you expect cricketers to try a similar thing? I think we've already seen it. I just don't know if it's been successful at the moment. But yes, I certainly think this will be something that we will see in the future of and we've seen it with social media in smaller ways, but it hasn't quite worked as much in cricket so far. But I know there are players who are active on social media because it helps with being drafted in T20 leagues. That's already a thing, right? How many, what sort of social media buzz you can bring, what your SEO value is, all these sorts of things matter. And so some of these players are already starting to think about that. There are some cricketers that already have, small social media, and I'm not talking about the major cricketers here. I'm talking about smaller cricketers who are willing to invest at times in small social media teams to help them, or pay their agents to get them involved with small social media teams. YouTube stuff and everything else, I think that will follow. So I think cricket's kind of there. We just haven't seen, and I don't know what level Wrexham is on. We've probably seen cricketers at a certain point get signed off stuff they've off their social media, but not as directly as perhaps someone like Ben Foster did. Himanshu says, no people batted like this. He's talking about the early 2000s, but it was always individual batting fast. Like Gilchrist and Haydos used to play fast, and Ponting were traditional players, and Sehwag for India. Yeah, that's very different to what Bazball is. And it's always worth remembering that, in that what you were talking about there is Quinton de Kock and Victor Trumper and Gilbert Jessup and these sorts of guys who like to hit the ball hard and feel confident scoring quickly. It's very different from what England is doing, where they're actually manufacturing ways for some of their batters to score quicker and to put pressure back on. And actually even then saying to someone like Zach Crawley, who I think Zach Crawley at his best is a decently scoring cricketer, they've upped his rate massively. That's very different to what we're talking about there. And also, that's their natural game. It's not all of England's natural game. And the best one to remember was Alex Lees, who started started first-class cricket by being a fairly attacking player at times, got into the Test team by being an absolute dead bat blocker. And then when he was in the Test team as a dead bat blocker, they got him to start attacking again. So that's very different than Matthew Hayden being a big guy with a big first step who likes to hit the ball hard, or Gilchrist, who basically thought to himself, they're going to get me or I'm going to get them, so I'm going to score quite quickly. Or Viv Richards, who, because he played across the line, or Kevin Peterson, because they played across the line so much, they had the ability, and were big, powerful guys, had the ability to score a little bit quicker than other people. Very, very different than this new method, which is more, as I said, similar to that sort of 10 to 40 over period of modern ODI cricket. Sandcup says, what do you think of Pope's dismissal? Was it the frame of the impact used, the reason for hitting versus umpire's call missing, and who decides which frame to use? It's a Hawkeye person. I thought it was out when it hit. I thought, if anything, it might have been umpire's call just slightly sliding down leg side, but I always thought it was a lot closer. I still think that there was an element of that first angle being shown, made it look a little bit worse. I didn't think it was ever going over. And so maybe I saw this LBW very differently to everyone else. So yeah, from that point of view, I didn't have a problem. But yeah, so what the Hawkeye person is doing is, remember, the ball doesn't move like this. The ball moves like this when it comes to frames. I haven't done that. But do you know what I mean? So you'll see sometimes when I take a still of cricket footage, I don't quite get the frame I want, and that's because I'm probably trying to look for when the ball is bounced or when the ball is hit the pad or whatever it may be. We don't have that frame. It doesn't exist. So what the Hawkeye person is trying to do is they're trying to get the first frame when the ball hits the pad, but they might have the frame here. Sorry, I get my hands out. They might have the frame here, and then they might have the frame here of when the pad is crumpling. And so they're trying to be as close and as accurate as possible with that. But I didn't have a problem with the Pope one, personally. I'm sure, England might, and I think me and Bumble disagreed on it, so everyone's going to look at it differently, but I thought it was fine. And Achal says, ideally, England batters other than Ben Duckett should try and bat long, try and get to par and open up all three options. Even right now, it seems likely only two possible results are India, win, and draw. Agree. I don't agree that the draw is the second favourite. I think England, and how many draws do England play in? All right, they played on some pretty flat pitches. They're going to do absolutely everything they can to try and manufacture a result. I would not think that the win is a problem. If England, we've seen England chip away and be really, really successful even when behind. I don't think it matters if they get to par or not. If they're 100 runs behind, actually, they'll still feel fairly confident. I think it's unlikely England get a lead, but not impossible the way that they're batting it certainly at the moment, but I think the pitch will be worse again tomorrow to bat on. So I think there'll be a couple of wickets at least from inconsistent bounce, maybe a couple from ragging turn, which will make it a little bit harder for England to get a lead. But no, I would certainly think that England winning is more likely than a draw at the moment. I think the last time I looked at the betting markets, and I'm talking about the betting exchanges here, India was 210. England was 315 and the draw was 480. I think the draw's probably a bit short there. I think England is probably a bit short and the draw is a little bit too short. I would still have India. I think those are really good odds on India to win this game from this position, even considering Bazball and everything else. England still have to score. England are going to have to score from here with 18 wickets in hand. They are 238 runs. So they're going to have to score another 500 odd runs in this game with 18 wickets in hand on what we assume is a wicket that is going to deteriorate with three really good spinners that they have to go up against. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there's a lot that needs to go on there, and that includes them bowling really well in that. But when you're thinking about you need to factor one other part to this. If India are in front, they're probably not going to try and block England completely out of the game. They're going to give England some sort of a challenge themselves, and that's when the third third innings pickle theory comes in, which is essentially most teams when they're batting in the third innings and they have a lead of 50 to 100, even a par score, they really struggle to bat properly in the third innings. England have been absolutely brilliant at bringing that back in and using that to their own advantage. So, no, I definitely wouldn't be thinking a draw is most likely, being that most test matches are results. We are only at stumps on day 2. Draw is very, very unlikely to me. England seem a little bit short in the odds. India seem a little bit like good value at the moment at that market, but however you look at it. But I think that there's going to be a result in this game. It would have to not deteriorate this wicket in order for it to be a result. This wicket should deteriorate at one point, right? May deteriorate at a time that that makes it impossible for England to win, which goes back to your point of and India should be favourites, but it should deteriorate and it should get worse. Based on we've already seen a few balls going low, we've seen a little bit of spin, we've seen a couple, reach up and hit players on the gloves and everything else. If just it deteriorates at a very placid level from here on in, I cannot see how we get a draw in this particular game. I know we've only had 12 wickets after 2 days, but we could see a flurry of wickets, later on without any problems there. But that's it for me today on the scoreboard. I'll be back again tomorrow. I am Jared Kimber. We do this show every day, so if this is your first time, subscribe, press the bell icon. But we're here at the end of every day's play, here on the scoreboard with Jared Kimber. Now, I've already said that, but yeah, here I am saying it again.
Support us on Patreon and help us keep making our content. Join for exclusive perks like the AMAs, the live calls, and to chat with me directly on Discord. You can also enjoy ad-free content, early podcasts, and access to my emailer. Step up your cricket-style game with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their exclusive player-themed t-shirts, including favourites like Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, and Ben Stokes. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection offers something unique for every fan. Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today.